So election monitoring is underway by public officials, and monitoring the polls and interpreting what it means for us, well, we have Éric Grenier for that. He joins us right now, the founder and the writer behind The Writ. Éric, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So, you know, in coming up with your numbers here, you've looked at the 4 of the latest surveys, and when you look at the range here, one has a 6-point lead for the Liberals. It goes also in another poll with Abacus, 3-point lead for the Conservatives. What do you make of these numbers?
Well, it does show that we're in a close race, right? When you do get to this point where you're starting to have some polls that are putting one party ahead and some other polls are putting another party ahead, that you're looking at primarily a tied race. But I think the bulk of the polls that we've seen, and there is some more that was coming out today, do suggest that if you have to say that who is on the better side of that tie, it is the Liberals. The Liberals have been leading in most of those polls, and in some of the ones that we've seen, the lead has been big enough that you would, say it's outside of the margin of error. You also see from those polls that the NDP's numbers have come down a lot. We've seen polls in the 10 to 12% range, 13%, but we also have seen some polls at 9 or 8% for the NDP. So it's clear that they are in trouble and that there's a tie at the top of the table. But probably if you have to give it to someone, the Liberals look like they're in the front-runner position as this campaign begins.
And is that because Liberals historically have a more efficient vote?
In terms of the seats, absolutely, right? Because this is how it's like. There's 2 different things running here. There's the national polls, which are very close. So Canadians are split between the Liberals and the Conservatives. But in terms of seats, it is not very close. With the kind of numbers that we've seen, even a poll like the Abacus poll, where the Conservatives were ahead by 3 points, you'd probably still give the Liberals the edge in the seats. In the polls where they are ahead by 2, 3, or more points, you would absolutely give them the advantage and put them in a majority position. We saw in the last 2 elections, they had 1 point less than the Conservatives in terms of the overall vote, but they won nearly 40 more seats. If they are ahead by a couple points or even tied, they start to crest to that level of 172 seats or more and in that majority position. So it is right now close race nationally in the polls, favorite for the Liberals in terms of the seats.
Okay, and in terms of seat projection, like roughly speaking, what do you, because it looks like you have the Liberals, when you crunch the numbers yourself, it looks like you have the Liberals in majority territory right now if the vote were today.
Yeah, absolutely. The Liberals would be just over the majority threshold. So my projections have them just a little bit over 172, south of 180, so somewhere around 175, 177. The Conservatives would be winning more seats, probably 130, 135, something like that. The NDP is a bit of the wild card here, because when you look at just the numbers, the NDP would be in dire straits to win almost any seats. The projections have them winning 6, 7 seats, something like that.
So not even official party status.
Not even close to official party status. But will some of those incumbents be able to buck that trend? Will they be able to survive thanks to their own profile? If the election were today. Obviously, if the election's in 5 weeks, things are going to change, and the NDP is going to be able to make that point that we should be there as an opposition party in a minority parliament. But right now, it looks like it's a 2-horse race. The Bloc Québécois is also on the table in Quebec, but other than that, it's between the Liberals and the Conservatives, with the Liberals being in that pole position to form another government.
Okay, so what does that mean for the Greens then? Because right now they're at 2 seats, and arguably, for Green supporters, those are high-profile candidates for them. Where is that party right now?
They are in trouble as well. We've seen a lot of polls that have had them sometimes at 2 or 3%. And in the last election, they had just over 2% of the vote. But that was they didn't run a full slate of candidates. This time they are aiming to run a full slate. But we're not seeing that the party is back to the 4, 5, 6% that they've been in previous elections. I think that for their campaign, it's going to be primarily to get Mike Morris reelected in Kitchener Centre, Elizabeth May in Sandwich Gulf Islands. That one might be in more danger than Morris in Kitchener Centre. Jonathan Pedneau is running in Outremont on the island of Montreal. That is going to be a tough seat for him to win, but maybe he can at least boost the Greens' numbers. We're not seeing that they have a boost of support in Quebec right now.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at, as you say, this what's forming out at this point, at least, this 2-horse race between Liberals and Conservatives, is this a region that's shifting? Is this a demographic that's shifting? I know you mentioned a little bit about the progressive vote, but in terms of, what regions this country or groups are carrying the Liberals higher up, what would you say to that?
It does seem like it's pretty broad-based. The Liberals are up among all the different age groups. They're now competitive with the Conservatives among young voters. They've moved ahead in most polls among older voters. They lead among women. The race is closer among men, with the Conservatives having the advantage. Regionally, the biggest swing has been in Atlantic Canada. There, the Liberals have jumped more than 20 points since Justin Trudeau's resignation. There's also been big jumps in British Columbia, where a lot of polls are now showing it a neck-and-neck race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. But you have to look even Alberta, the Prairies, Ontario, and Quebec. There has been that movement, double-digit movement for the Liberals since Trudeau's resignation. So there's a couple areas where it's particularly pronounced, but it's hard to find a part of the country right now where we're not seeing a big jump in Liberal support.
Okay, you say since the Trudeau resignation, but I was wondering how much of this has to do with the Mark Carney honeymoon, because traditionally there's a honeymoon after a new leader takes over a party, and in Mark Carney's case, there seemed to be a lift even when his nomination was being rumored, let alone confirmed and winning.
Yeah, I do think he is what is carrying the Liberals to this next level. Just before his became the leader, the Liberals were starting to get to the 30% mark with Justin Trudeau. There was a handful of polls that might have had the party higher, but that might have been baking in Mark Carney's leadership. But I think one of the things that's really boosting him forward is that his own personal numbers are actually quite high. On average, a number of polls that have had questions about positivity ratings, favorability ratings, Mark Carney's average positive score is 44%, so higher than where the Liberal Party is. So it does suggest that he actually could lift the party further up. So I do think that he is having an impact. And even when you compare who Canadians prefer to be Prime Minister between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, the gap between the two of them is bigger on that question than on the question between the Liberals and the Conservatives. So you're not looking at brand here. You are looking at Carney boosting the Liberals up to higher levels in the polls.
Okay, but does that popularity carry over into Quebec? Because, I'm thinking specifically about Mark Carney's proficiency in the French language. What do the numbers in that province say?
We do see the same kind of jump for the Liberals in Quebec, not as pronounced as we've seen elsewhere. And the Liberals weren't coming from, they didn't have the same base in Quebec they might have had elsewhere. But we haven't seen as much of a jump. But what is different in Quebec than what we've seen in the rest of the country is that the Conservative vote hasn't come down. So the votes that the Liberals have picked up in Quebec have come from the Bloc Québécois, unlike other areas where they came from both the NDP and the Conservatives. It does suggest that that vote might not be strongly sovereignist, strongly nationalist, so it could be pretty volatile vote. The quality of Carney's French, I think, will get profiled more and more as this campaign unfolds. I'm not sure if a lot of Quebecers have heard it. Not also sure it's going to make that much of a difference if the ballot box issue is Donald Trump and not, the French language. But I think that the Liberals are vulnerable in Quebec, but for now, they're in a position to make gains.
Okay. Listen, there's also the choice here that we're essentially facing like the bare minimum of an election period. More 37, not what's the maximum, 51 days of the maximum length. Given how relatively short this campaign is going to be, how much change might we expect to see in the numbers?
We could see a lot. It's hard. Most campaigns you don't see that much movement. The last few elections in 2019, 2021, the polls hardly moved once the writ dropped. But we remember 2015, 2011. You can have a lot of movement in a short amount of time. And I think that people are very engaged in this campaign. We saw some polling from Abacus showing that the interest in this election far higher than in 2021. So the fact that there's more engagement, the fact that there's more unpredictability, volatility coming from the United States, there is the potential for lots of change. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, and it doesn't mean it'll reverse the trends that we've seen so far, but this has been an unpredictable few months, and I would assume the next 5 weeks will be just as unpredictable.
Okay, well, luckily we have you booked. Éric Grenier, thank you for